Welcome to Mavens of Data. This week we're speaking with Dustin Schimek, Enterprise Analytics Manager at MedStar Health. I loved hearing Dustin's thoughts on collaboration, knowledge sharing, and breaking down silos within organizations being crucial for professional development. I hope you enjoy this episode. So excited to have you. I'm really looking forward to this episode. And before we dive right in, can you give people a little bit of your background?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So thanks again for having me on. So Dustin Schimek. So I've been in analytics, data and analytics practitioner for about 13 years now. Started as an entry-level analyst, as probably many folks here on the call did if you're in the field. And kind of have had progressive roles in the data and analytics space over that 13 years. I was fortunate enough to move into, after a few years, a manager of analytics role, and then get to build kind of an analytics function from scratch and move into a director of analytics position at another organization I worked for. And over that time, really developed a love for just getting people excited about the potential of analytics, building engagement with projects, getting a strong return out of the projects we were delivering. Just really fell in love with that whole process and just love bringing new people into the field. And also just, folks that aren't interested to be in the field, but want to be, power users of data, getting them excited about how to find insights and action them. And so that actually, that passion kind of led me to my current role where I lead data enablement in our analytics community practice at MedStar Health. And so I'm really fortunate to have a role like this. I kind of manage our roadmap for data fluency and data education programs there. And also lead our analytics community of practice, which we have several hundred practitioners across our system and hospital centers a part of. We have kind of bi-weekly virtual events that we host there, and I get to help plan content for that and just serve that community and their development needs as professionals. So something I'm super grateful to be able to do each day.
That's awesome. And 13 years is a long time. And it sounds like you've had an amazing trajectory and that you've also got to try out, a lot of different positions. When you think about how things have changed and what it looks like now in 2025, like what is the state of being an analyst in 2025? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So things have changed significantly. I'll start with kind of a more fun example. I would say that when I first started, a lot of people asked me like what my job was or what I did, and there was like, I know at the first company I started at, there was only like a couple, true data analysts there. And then like when I got my first analytics manager position, it was like the first time that company ever had an analytics manager. And so there are always these questions of like, what does that role do? And like, are you a nerd, and like stuff like this. Right. And it was kind of like a peripheral part of the organizations, we were working on really critical stuff, but it wasn't like core to the business or core to the organizations. It wasn't embedded in the culture there. Data wasn't. And that's changed significantly. I would say inflection point hit around 2018 or 2019. And that was when folks really started to ask me, like, how can I get into this field? And just the perception, I think, changed from kind of a nice to have, to like something that was going to be really critical to get right for the organizations and worthy of investment into. In terms of what it means today, I would say today, I think, we've had folks that have kind of grown up in different paths in the data and analytics space. You have folks that have focused more on just data visualization historically. You've had folks that have focused on data engineering. You've had folks that have focused maybe on data science. And I think we're seeing more of these, what I would call like analytics engineering type roles pop up. This is something I see in my every Friday. Many of you probably know, but if you don't, I post out on LinkedIn just a rundown of all of the positions that I see shared by hiring managers in my LinkedIn feed. And I've seen a trend towards, maybe a quarter of those positions or so roughly being something similar to analytics engineer, where it's a combination of, someone that has the data engineering skill set or a basic data engineering skill set, but also has some of your typical front end analytics skills, data visualization, data storytelling, things like that. And I think many people are stronger in one area versus the other. but emergence of those two roles in particular is something that I'm seeing a lot of. And even senior roles, senior analytics engineer type roles where it's a combination of all of those skill sets are really, I think organizations are looking to hire someone that is kind of that jack of all trades and can come in with some experience and make an impact right away.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think we're seeing a lot of the different roles sort of merging, right? Because there was also this time where analytics felt it was SQL, it was visualization, using a tool. And then we did start to see more positions asking for Python and R, or less R now, but Python, even though it was, a pure analytics or a pure analyst role, right? And then sort of, I think as time goes on, we're starting to see just more come into each of the buckets. Like each of the scope of these roles is growing. Is that something that you're seeing as well, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's interesting you bring that up because I started back in 2019. I started collecting data on like every 6 months, I would grab 100 position postings that were out there and grab data on the skills that were asked for, like the hard skills that were asked for in each position, like the experience level, the degree requirements, things like that. And what I started to notice over time was that not all, but a significant number of positions started to get kind of what I would call a laundry list of hard skill requirements in there, even if it wasn't an analytics engineering position, even if it was just a data analyst or data visualization specialist or something like that, you would still see, divided between the required and preferred skills, a lot of stuff in there. Right. And so I do think there's been this convergence of, companies just want to have someone that can come in and kind of make an impact right away. Now, I think that, that could be a positive for people, I suppose, that have a wider range of skills. You're probably pretty marketable right now, but then I would suspect a significant amount of people might be kind of scared by that because it's like, wow, do I have to go and really learn every single one of these things to step in a role? And I would propose that you don't necessarily have to. I think there are ways of getting around that and selling your value in absence of having, every single skill checked off for a position. But perhaps that's something we can get into further in the conversation.
Right. And I also think you have to think about like what your strengths are, and not just what your strengths are, but what you actually want to do. Because I interviewed for an analytics engineering role in 2016 before we even really hearing about it. I didn't know what it was, but it was pretty clear to me too that it was going to ramp up on my SQL skills to do this. And I was then going to be doing less presentations, less working with the business, less, cross-functional data problem solving in the way that I was used to. And so I'm actually not even that familiar with the role, but so like this analytics engineer role, like, was that what you saw as well? And is that typically what the expectations look like?
Yeah, I think so. I think though, like what I'm seeing though, like in the practical side of things is though, even though you may have organizations asking for this long list of skills, I think like there's some core skills that you can focus on. And as I've built that report that I mentioned over time and time again, I've seen, 4 or 5 skills pop to the top in terms of these are the skills that are mentioned, 30 to 70% of the time in position postings. And the funny thing is when I work for organizations, I see that those skills pop all the time as the ones that we're talking about 80, 90% of the time, or that are being applied to projects that are being worked on 80 or 90% of the time. When I looked at the opening slide that you put up, I would say those are definitely some of them. The 5 icons that you had up there, you had Tableau, Power BI, Python, Excel, SQL. Between SQL, Tableau, and Power BI, you can do a lot of good for organizations. You can do a lot of good. And you can also create projects where you can tell some pretty good stories in terms of the value that you added just from those skills. And so I think, you can fill in the other skills over time, but if you get really good at the core stuff, you apply the 80-20 rule, you develop a strong skill set around the core skills that are going to be needed for most roles, 80 or 90% of roles, you're going to set yourself up for success. And you can just add on some of the additional skills over time, and you're going to be that much more valuable. But, you get a good few skills to start out as a foundation, you can create a ton of impact. And I would focus on the storytelling piece of, what was the value that you got out of the work that you did? How can you market that for the future? It doesn't take too many stories to be able to sell yourself for a more senior role.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's a super important point that you made around like a couple core skills, because even when these job recs have a bunch of stuff listed, when you go
Yep.
into the interview and you say like, what is my day actually going to look like?
Right, exactly.
Like I've taken jobs that ask for Python, and then when I get in there, like I actually used Python maybe 3 times a year, and it was like they wanted it for if something came up, but it wasn't actually something that I was going to be doing every day. And so from your perspective, there's these couple things, but what should analysts be focusing on right now? And has that changed over the years?
Yeah, for sure. I think that if you're fortunate enough to be in a role right now, let's say, for example, it's a entry level role to maybe, another early career stage level role, maybe, an analytics engineer position or data analyst position where you've had 2 or 3 years worth of experience, something like that. And you've gotten really good at applying your skills to kind of do the work that's put in front of you. What I would focus on and what I see in terms of the folks that are standing out today is take that next step to be willing to kind of put your work in front of others and market your work. And so if there's like, at MedStar Health, as an example, we have a community of practice where folks can, volunteer. They can reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like to present my project that we just published out at our community practice meeting, and share it with the rest of the organization. If there's meetings similar to that, and maybe you don't have a community practice, maybe you have some other forums, you might have to get creative, right? But where are there opportunities to share what you're doing and communicate the value of it? It's awfully hard for people to recognize you or recognize this value of your skills if they don't see what you've done and how you've applied it and how it connects to them and your organization. And so I wouldn't worry about like being perfect with doing that. I would just worry about like taking the step towards sharing your work with others, no matter how small of a step that might be, and just try to build up that confidence and skill over time of just being willing and courageous enough to share your work. That I think is probably the biggest thing. When I look at folks that have advanced, that have taken that next role on, it's because they put themselves out there, they got their name out there. And I can, in every organization that I've been a part of, whether it's 10 years ago or in the modern landscape today, the folks that were promoted or moved into more senior roles or whatever, got their name out there, they were the ones that everyone knew their passion. Everyone knew what they were working on, or at least the key projects they had delivered. There was no question about that. You could list off the people right off the top of your head that were most engaged, that were most passionate, that had delivered the most value. And so think about how you can become one of those folks. The sad thing is there's folks that do make a huge impact that don't always get their name out there in front of others, or they don't become one of those people that come to mind when folks think about the top performers. But I think everyone can, even if you are pretty introverted or you're, reluctant to share your wins and things like that. I think that it's a skill that can be built over time, and it just takes taking a first step.
No, 100%. And that is a skill, right? We always talk about the technical skills, and then interviewing itself is a skill, and how you answer the behavioral questions is a skill. And then how, when you get into a job, how you self-promote and how you get that visibility is also like takes charisma and skill. And one of the things that, is an opportunity for getting that visibility is when you build a POC of an interesting project and you start trying to get buy-in for that. Like, what can you share with us around POCs, how to get to that quickly and how to make the most out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think regardless of where, the idea for this POC comes from, whether it comes from you or someone else, gives you the idea, like your boss gives it to you, something to do or whatever, I would take the same approach. I would try to develop kind of a minimum viable data product, and put it out there for just to get some feedback first to see, maybe it's maybe you have to build a new data source and then build a dashboard off of it. And, you want to see whether or not folks understand, intuitively what you've put into that dashboard, and understand the type of insights they can extract from it. I would just build something that wasn't perfect first and put it in front of a small group. Maybe it's a group of folks that you trust or are more comfortable with, and share it with them and just see what they say. Sometimes folks reach out to me and say like, hey, would you be willing to look at create this new data source and dashboard? Would you be willing to take a look at what I've put together before I publish it out? And they'll just kind of show me some of the basics and see what I think, like see how I interpret some of the information, the way it's displayed in there. And oftentimes, you probably have 70 or 80% of it right, but there might be some things that you hear back from your testers that you wouldn't have thought of, or maybe people misinterpret something consistently in there that you need to fix, things like this. And so I pressure test it a little bit, and then you can work on refining it before you publish it out to a wider audience. But that's kind of the approach I take with POCs: is start small, do some testing, make some improvements in iteration, and don't worry too much about being perfect in the beginning. That feedback you get and those improvements you make is actually more important. The other thing I would say too, and this kind of ties to after you've actually released a new data product, and it ties back to your question on how analysts can stand out. One thing that I think is, once you release that data product, if you really wanted to get full return out of what you've published out, and you want to make an impact as an analyst, as much as you can, like, you want to make sure that you're focusing on building engagement with that product. And so I think oftentimes, we kind of set it and forget it with data projects. We publish them out, we make them available. Maybe we do a one-time training, but I would argue that the projects that really get the most return on investment to the organization, and the most kind of attention selfishly to the individual that created it, are going to be the ones that get that high return. And you can only get the high return usually from having a very, very intentional effort around getting people excited about the data product, training them on it, helping them understand and connect to the value within that, how it's going to impact their job, how they can, they're going to improve as a professional as a result of using it. And so sometimes that takes 6 to 12 months worth of effort beyond the time that you actually do the technical work. But I think that's another way, to your question earlier too, that you can stand out as an analyst, is really invest in the release phase of a project.
Yeah. And so much of what we're talking about is skills, because again, it was the showboating, it was the interviewing. And then even with this, right, when you're talking about the POC, it's not build it and forget it. It's go and present it to people, train people up on it. And then even after people are trained up on it, you can follow up again and say like, hey, are you getting use out of this? What could I add that would help you to get more use out of this, right? And like, so much of it is just the people side in trying to get adoption of that product. I mean, obviously it's adoption, but.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the one thing I would say there too is, there is a kind of, in terms of measuring utilization, there's a process you can make out of that too. This was actually something I was fortunate enough to be presenting out at Tableau conference last week, and we were talking about how we kind of approach enablement at our organization. One of the things that we've, been focused on is monitoring our utilization reporting. So whether you're using Tableau as your front end reporting tool, or Power BI, both make available utilization data and statistics on what users are using the content you've put out, what pieces of your content are being utilized most heavily, just overall what dashboards or workbooks are being utilized. And my suggestion in my session last week, and to folks that I work with internally, is make it a process to watch that utilization data. Know who your heavy users are, know who your light users are, know what your overperforming content is or underperforming content is. And when you have those insights, then have a plan to action them. And this becomes just a living, breathing process over time. Check those stats every couple of weeks. And then if you see low performing users, get curious. Maybe you reach out to them, and not in a punitive way. You ask them, hey, how are things going with this data product, or this dashboard? Like, what do you think about this? Is this something you could see yourself using every day? And you'd be surprised when you ask those open-ended questions, what comes out. You can use that feedback then to go back, make iterative improvements. And then 9 times out of 10, you're going to see the utilization of your data product go up. And you may see only small changes as you work through that process, from time to time. But over time, if you just follow that cycle, continue to make those improvements, continue to work the utilization data, continue to build the engagement, you're going to have your utilization way up here where it would have just stayed flat if you hadn't done anything.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And so we've been talking a lot about the people parts. And so community building is also really big in analytics, and you are super good at it. Why do you think it's important, and how do we build stronger analytics communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think it's really important. I think it's actually important kind of now more than ever. I know we say that every year, but I really do believe it for this year. I think a couple things there. I think the kind of like some of the in-person meetups and things, I think kind of went down a little bit over the last few years, and I think they're starting to come back. I think like when I went out to this conference last week, I just felt like the buzz was very similar to what it was kind of pre-COVID. And I think there's just this natural need that folks have for connection. And I think fits into my second point here, is that there's so much demand for not only analytics, but also, AI products and, just knowledge around like the changes taking place in the marketplace and things like that. I think like relying on each other and your community and people that you trust is more important than ever. Especially considering the fact that I think like if you look at the conference landscape, a lot of them are like vendor driven conferences, and so that's great. You can get some good information there, but like, I personally reach out to folks within my own network, people that I trust that have been practitioners that are doing the same kind of work as me, just to get their perspective on things, and it's awfully hard to have those trusted people to turn to if you don't have a community to plug into to meet those folks and continue to stay in touch with them. And so that's why I think whether it's external communities, the broader communities out in the data space, or communities within your organization, I just think that now is really a time where we need them very badly. We have a lot of, sales content coming at us every day for all of the new tools and products that are out there. We have a lot of changes taking place in the marketplace. We have a lot of pressures to adapt to those changes as data practitioners. And I think that we need to rely on each other's expertise to overcome some of these challenges.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I feel similarly to the way that you do. It was in-person meetups were sort of bigger. They dipped down. They're coming back. And then I just lost my train of thought. But what I can say is that going to those in-person events, I always come back completely revitalized with like a new sort of, I'm like reinvigorated. Yeah. And I'm like ready to go get it. Oh, the other point that I wanted to make was, yes, the internal and the external is so important, because if I wasn't leveraging like an external community, I would still be doing a lot of techniques internally that, are now no longer considered a best practice. I was using stepwise regression to choose, different factors in my model and different things that I literally learn on Twitter that now I use in day to day to, different methods, different algorithms, different stuff. But then also too, internally, you have to be sharing, people cannot be in their own little silos, because you learn a lot that way too. And there's just so much information we've got to be pulling from basically everywhere possible, because it moves just so fast.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of if folks are thinking about, potentially starting an internal community at their organizations, I would encourage you to do it. Start small. I think in terms of connecting, helping your organization connect to the value of building those communities and why you might, be given some time by your boss or whatever to invest in creating one, if that's something you're interested in. I think just some simple examples, and you talked to it, in some of the things that you just said, breaking down silos. I bet you at the larger your organization, and this happens at medium-sized organizations too, but especially in larger organizations, you have different individuals and different teams sometimes working on the same stuff, right? And think about how much cost there is to the organization to have two highly skilled professionals working on the same project, or two teams in some
That
cases
happens a
working on
lot.
the same project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those dollars add up very, very quickly if you've got duplication of work. And that's one thing that becomes evident right away when you bring a community together is, wow, they're working on this, they're working on this. We should probably collaborate, or we should probably stop having this team work on it and continue having this team working on it, right? And that's just one example. I think also too, like talented people like to work with talented people, and so the more that you can develop a working group of talented professionals that are like-minded at your organization, the more snowball effect you're going to have around the ability to recruit other folks that want to be a part of that too, and increase the retention of that group that's part of that community. And so for a larger organization, a 5 or 10 or 15% increase in retention, that adds up very, very quickly in terms of real dollars. And then the other thing I would propose too is, and you kind of mentioned this as well, Kristen, is, we've got new technologies that we're going to have to bring into organizations over the next several years, right? And if your time to adoption of those new technologies decreases by, let's say it takes, without a community, it takes 2 years to adopt a new technology, but with one, it takes 3 months, because you've already got this cohesive group that's on the same page and knows what each other's doing and is meeting all the time and understands why we're bringing in this new technology. That reduction in the time that it takes to adopt a new technology, I mean, my gosh, we know how much some consultants charge, right, to drive change management around new technologies and things like that. My proposition is that a good, strong community can bring that time to adoption down and increase the speed in which you're going to get a return out of it, which there's significant dollars tied to that for sure.
No, 100%. And the learning is big because I know personally, if I feel like I'm learning, I feel like I have purpose, I feel fulfilled, I'm more likely to stay, right? So that absolutely improves retention. But to your point too about the silos, I created a testing governance meeting because we had different teams that were running hypothesis tests and they conflicted with each other. And then we end up with garbage, like all these resources wasted because you can't analyze the test. It needs to be rerun in a time period that doesn't conflict with somebody else. And so everything got pushed back. And by being able to just get everyone in a room now, and I mean, it was just one person from each team. So it's not that everyone has this information, and we hope that they'll bring it back to their team and share it with them. But we reduced the number of tests that, I mean, we'd run a business card test and say, we're offering $10 business cards on, Google, and then they'd come to the site. And because we were also testing a new web page from a new provider, it wasn't respecting that. Right. And so it was not just garbage data. It was also a horrible customer experience. And so by getting people together, now the analytics team had a better sense of what was going on. You get better test ideas because we know what's already being done. We know how to extend that. We can come up with alternative thoughts, but also we're not providing a terrible customer experience for these people.
Yeah, there's a customer satisfaction piece for sure.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a ton about, a ton of different things that involve, honing your skills in how you showboat. I probably shouldn't call it showboating, but, all these different skills that we've talked about. From your perspective, what types of skills, what types of attributes really make an analyst stand out in 2025?
Yeah, for sure. And I think just to address first to the showboating concept, because I think that is what oftentimes folks think of it as. I think too, sometimes folks in the analytics community are, they're self-conscious about the fact that they don't want to come across as bragging or things like that with their work, which I totally understand. And I've felt the same way myself. I would encourage perhaps a little bit of a paradigm or mindset shift around that for folks. And I think, your organization has hired you for a reason. They've hired you because of your expertise and because of what you're going to create, the value that you're going to create for them. And highlighting what you've done and showcasing your work is going to be mutually beneficial to both you and your organization. And 99% of the time when I have seen people proactively show what they're doing, make a connection between what they've done and the value that they've added to their organization, 99% of the time that is viewed as a positive thing that they did. And I don't think that very many folks view it as showboating. I think they're impressed by it. I think it adds to the individual's personal value proposition in the eyes of others. But I also think that it inspires others within the organization to go and do something similar. You know, they may see something from your work and say, hey, I think we could do this same type of thing in this area, or it may earn you an invitation to go and do something like that somewhere else, or in potentially a role that's of a more senior level, maybe not immediately, but over time. I think that's how you get the invitations to do that. And that's great for your organization. Your organization benefits when your skills are fully utilized, and your skills and potential can't be fully utilized unless folks see how they can be applied and see the value that they can add. So I know it can be hard in the beginning. It certainly was for me. But I would challenge folks to think of it as this is something that's mutually beneficial, and that is going to allow my organization to get the full value out of my role to see and understand what I'm doing and what I'm working on. So that's, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to say that's that same communication we were just talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if people aren't aware of the projects that are going on, there can be duplicates, there can be actual conflicts that cause a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're also, yes, you're highlighting what you're doing, but you're also doing a favor to the organization in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And in terms of, to answer your question directly of like, what do I think the top skills are, like kind of hard skill wise, maybe a blend of hard and soft skills, you know, I think in terms of developing projects, I think like it's, you know, so there's three things that I always tell people that I think you have to be able to do as an analyst as kind of table stakes. If you want to be a good one, you need to be able to get the data, you know, and that's what organizations are getting at in terms of SQL skills that they're asking for in Python and things like this, right? You have to be able to get the data. You have to be able to analyze it, you know, and so now it bleeds into, you could do some analysis with Python or R, but also, you know, you can do some exploratory analysis and dashboard building using a Tableau or Power BI, right? And so that's why we see some of those skills listed out. So you have to get the data, you have to analyze it, you have to find the insights, and then third thing is you have to tell a story with it. And so you have to be able to communicate the insights that are in there, or actually be able to show people how they can get the insights themselves from it if it's some self-service product that you're putting out there. So getting the data, you know, and we all know some of the common skills around doing that, analyzing the data, and then telling a story with it, I think are the three key things just from a development and delivery standpoint. But then I think those three things can make you like a B+ to A- analyst. If you want to go to a A+ level, then the things that I would be thinking about for sure are, after you release a project, what are the things that you're going to do to continue to drive engagement with it? Are you going to make using utilization data part of your everyday? And are you going to watch who's using your data sources or dashboards that you're developing? Are you going to be proactive about reaching out to folks that are your power users and asking them to share stories on the use cases with others and continue to create the snowball effect and promote the value of it? Are you going to reach out to the people that are underutilizing it? Are you going to improve your underutilizing content? Things like that. This is where you go from good to great, you know, and if you can produce a high quality product using those few skills I mentioned earlier, and then really get engagement out of it, now you're talking about transforming your team, your organization, et cetera. And folks that have that transformative impact, which you're absolutely capable of having a transformative impact if you have if you do those things I just mentioned, those are going to be the folks that are going to, I think, really rise to the top in the field.
Yeah. So what I was hearing there is that, you know, the standout people are the ones with the real follow through. They're not just creating something. They are then following up, they're making sure it gets adopted, and they're like staying on top of it, which is also going to help with that visibility as well, right? Because you're now talking about your project.
Exactly. Yep. Totally.
I love that. Okay, so we are actually getting a ton of questions in the Q&A. So I think it's almost time to move over there. But if
Okay,
somebody
cool.
wants to connect, find, follow you, look up your work, where's the
Yeah.
best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Dustin Schimek, and also I have a podcast called Data Ideas Podcast, which I had done 53 episodes or so, and then I took a break when I started this new role, as I wanted to do a really good job with this new role I was starting and get our internal community going. But I just restarted this a few weeks ago. I'm going to be doing weekly episodes. So the podcast is Data Ideas, and the focus of the podcast is going to be on just growing your career in data and AI. And so if you want to check out the Data Ideas podcast, that's out there too. But other than that, it's really LinkedIn where I announce most of my stuff.
All right, perfect. So definitely, guys, go follow Dustin over on LinkedIn and check out his podcast. And then let's dive into Q&A. So
Yeah, cool.
This question is from Janet. Is having a master's degree in data analytics going to set you apart?
Yeah, I mean, is it something that sets you apart? I mean, I definitely think that it can be something that could. I don't think it's the end all be all. I think, in terms of when I interview folks or when I look at folks' resumes, when people ask me for feedback, I would say that the number one thing that I'm looking for is, what have you done that's kind of unique or would set you apart? And completing a good master's degree program could be one thing, but my eye always goes to, is there recognition that you got for something, for a project that you did, or was there something that made you stand out, and it doesn't even have to be as a data practitioner. If you got an award for, let's say you're transitioning into the field and you were the, best at your organization at whatever you did before, that really stands out to me. It's like, that shows me that you really have the aptitude towards, following through and doing things end to end and being great at what you do. And so I think highlighting accomplishments, if you do have a portfolio of work and, let's say you've entered something into a contest and even if you were a runner up or a nominee for a certain award or something like that, put that at the top. And I think those are really interesting things even to pull out during interviews. I enjoy talking about those things with folks. I like to learn more about, just recognition they've gotten or what made them take on a certain project. And it just opens up some good conversations so I can learn more about them and what makes them tick. So I think, yes, a master's degree can help. Yes, you're going to learn some good skills as a part of that, and that might be foundational to being an analyst. But I think highlighting accomplishments and highlighting unique projects and unique points of value that you've added are really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I love that, because absolutely, these days, formal education is not the same as it used to be, and sort of being a barrier to entry. But at the same time, a master's degree does set you up to really focus, and,
Right.
you will work on projects in your master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure that those are the types of things that you would want to work on to highlight for a potential employer, and, really trying to use your time as best as you can. But it's also, will it help you stand out? Yes. I mean, even 10 years later, I've interviewed for roles where people call out that my master's degree was from WPI, and they're like, oh, that's a really good school. So
Right.
Do people notice? Yes. But is it a barrier in the way that it used to be? Well, that's changing.
I would agree with that. Yep. I think that's a really good characterization.
Okay. Let's try and go for the voted ones. So this is from Sophie. What advice do you have for a data analyst trying to move into a new industry? I work in travel, and now I'm trying to get into banking. Had a few issues since I don't have the industry knowledge, even though I have the technical and soft skills.
Interesting. Okay. So my perspective on this is, I think there's a great importance in these situations in networking and developing a network in the industry that you're wanting to go into. And so when I think about even the role that I have now, I've traditionally, my experience has mostly been in the business world, and but I work for a healthcare organization, and the way that I found out about the role that I have at this healthcare institution is through someone that I had known through the data community. And I think that the more you can get immersed in the data community and across industries, and particularly for you know that you want to go into banking, think about, where do those people hang out? How can you get to know them? How can you find them on LinkedIn? How can you get interested in their content and comment on their content? And then from there, how can you, have a coffee chat with them or a lunch with them, things like that. And just start to get to know the folks in that industry and let them see that you have, to your point, the technical and soft skills to do some great work. And, maybe you've got a little bit of learning to do in the banking industry, but because they see what kind of a person you are, they know you, they like you, they see your technical and soft skills, they can connect the dots that, it's not such a long shot to think that they could learn a little bit enough about banking to be great in this industry. But I think it does take getting to know the folks. I think if you apply blindly to the positions without knowing folks, it can be very difficult to get your application to the top, or get your name into a round of interviews. But whatever you can do to kind of force your way in to meet some folks at think about the key organizations that are hiring. I'm sure if you do a Pareto, I bet there's several institutions in the banking industry that make up 80 or 90% of the hiring, and think about who those institutions are and who you could potentially get in contact with or meet there, or, are there folks that could introduce you to the key players there, where you could, like I say, have a coffee, have a virtual lunch, put your name out there, get interested in their content, tell them how much you loved about a post that they put out there, just to, get your name in front of them so that they know who you are and they know you have interest and they see your skills, and they can see that you'd be a person that would be a good person to bring on board.
I think I'd like to add to that too, because I've worked in the utilities, healthcare, financial remittance was my last one. And then the majority of my time was spent in e-commerce. But so in the utilities, I was in like the supply chain org. Okay. In healthcare, e-commerce, and financial remittance, I was in marketing, right? So after my first role in marketing, even though I was moving to e-commerce, it was in a marketing function. And so I didn't know much about e-commerce, but I knew data and I knew marketing. And so if you're staying within an area of the business that you already know, like you can play up the fact that like you have extensive experience in that area as well. And so you've got like a lot more commonalities than stuff that's new. Actually, there is like a ton of new stuff to learn. And I've struggled to get up to speed every time I hopped, but I also really enjoy it because it's a fun challenge and I love learning new things. And then, I'd say, like Dustin was saying, I'd read the blog articles from their site because it gives you an idea of some of the terminology that they're using, some of the big initiatives that they've got going on. And so you can speak intelligently to the types of things that they might be most interested in, even though you still have a ton of knowledge gap stuff that you're going to have to get yourself up to speed on.
Yep.
Ooh. How do you evaluate the potential of somebody who is going for an entry-level position?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of goes back to, just for me personally, what I mentioned earlier, I'm looking for things that just demonstrate, if we're talking about an entry-level position, a true entry-level position, it's, yes, you have to have a baseline level of skills that you've developed, learned through whatever, whether it's formal education or certifications or online training or whatever. You have to be able to demonstrate, that you have those skills. And usually there's a technical part of the interview where you can demonstrate that. But assuming you have that, it really is, I think, they always talk about like the two things that you can use to build trust right away with folks are their warmth and their level of expertise. Right. And like, I think of that from my perspective, I think of it in terms of the passion that I see come out from someone that I meet with. Have they learned so much about and invested so much time in learning about, the skills that they've acquired because they're really passionate about it? And does that passion shine through, and do they communicate that passion in appropriate way, a way that would be a fit for the culture of the team that I'm on. That's what I'm looking for the most. Is this person going to be passionate, really want to problem solve, and be a good fit for the culture of the team that I'm a part of? And so, if you can demonstrate that passion, and maybe even bring up something during your interview that no one else would bring up. I've seen folks bring along a couple presentation slides with them, of like, hey, this is something that I would do if I was there. And even if it's not right, that's okay. I mean, I always remember the people that do that, and that really impresses me when I see that, when someone put forward just a little bit extra effort, beyond what someone else did, to show their passion, to show their interest. For an entry level position, these are the things that I'm looking for. Is I want to see that passion and just something that is unique about you.
No, and that's awesome, especially like if you don't have a whole project portfolio, right? Being able to create a PowerPoint of how you would solve a problem that is relevant to the type of business that you're applying to is a fantastic thing to bring in, if obviously it would be better if you have both, but like that's also something very relevant that gives you talking points, and you're able to sort of guide the conversation in a direction that you're prepared for.
And 100%. And just Kristen, to add to that too, I think like I'm not an expert on the best interview tactics. I can only speak to what I've been on many hiring panels myself and have talked to many hiring managers. I can only speak to what I've seen work, from that vantage point. But I think to your point of controlling the dialogue, I think that I always tell folks, if you can go in with one or two things that, because people feel they don't have control when they go into an interview, right? And that it may be true for some percentage of it, but what you can have is, just like what I brought to this podcast, you can have a couple things that you want to be sure that you get across. And whether that's talking points, whether that's, like I said earlier, a couple slides you bring up, think about what those things are, that when you think about your audience, the people that you're interviewing with, that they would want to hear from you, think about what that stuff is, make those connection points, and have the courage to bring it forward. And I can't say it's going to work in 100% of situations, but 9 times out of 10, I think that will help to stand you apart, especially for an entry level position. Same is true for any position, really, but I think on an entry level, it's very true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so Caitlin has asked, what suggestions do you have for someone trying to break into the field? So basically they're saying, hey, I know the tools, but I don't have years of experience. Right. How would I approach this?
So my honest answer here is, part of it would be what I just said if you get to the interview phase, but it's hard to apply that if you don't get to the interview phase, right? And I suspect that's the situation that some people are in. They're not getting interviews and things like this. And right now, I think, I know it's cliche term, but I really do believe it more than ever. It is important to have some type of an inroad, to the position. You have to know somebody at least that can vouch for you as a person or your work, that personally, and they may know the hiring manager, or at least someone that works with the hiring manager. Maybe it's a third degree connection or something like that. And so how do you get this network built, right? Like you have to take some intentional steps to build it. And so whether that's through LinkedIn and some of the networking tactics you can take through LinkedIn, which is a whole nother conversation. And there's lots of content out there on how to build a network through LinkedIn, right? Or attending local user group meetings or meetups in the analytics community in your area, or going to conferences. I've known people that have gone to conferences with one goal: to find a job. And they go out and meet as many people as they possibly can. They talk to as many people as they possibly can. They get interested in every single product that's out there in the expo hall, and then after conversations about their product, they talk about what they would like to do and how they could help them, And I realize it's idealistic to think that every single person would have the comfort in doing that. But what I would do is just think about what would you have comfort with, or what would you realistically be able to do to step just a little bit outside of your comfort zone and do. And maybe it's a few different tactics. For me, I like to leverage LinkedIn, and I like to go to meetups, and and I like to go to conferences, right? And I'm not like Mr. Extrovert at conferences, but I go to a number of meetups where I'm going to meet with other like-minded folks or folks that have similar interests to me. And then I'll make sure I connect with them on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going and perhaps ask for a coffee chat down the road. And so you develop this network where you just have this ecosystem of folks that you can reach out to. And if you see that they're connected with someone that you applied to a job at, you can ask them for an introduction, things like that. And it's a little bit of work to do it, but it pays big dividends, right? And there's a lot of applicants for roles right now. That's the reality. What I'm seeing is that if you have even a slight connection with someone, you don't have to know the hiring manager directly, but someone can vouch for you or introduce you, that takes you 90% of the distance towards getting an interview.
Yeah. And I know we're talking about like sort of getting in that first job, but those connections that you make even 10, 15 years later, now that I've been around for 15 years, like people end up at companies that you're interested in. Other people move too. And then you find yourself reaching out to these people. Hey, do you remember me from so-and-so? And like, I would love if you could help me get my resume in the right hands. And it's, it's compound. It pays dividends.
Yes.
As I think Dustin already said. So Mohammed asked this question. I use my data skills in my hobbies. Buying and selling luxury. Do you recommend sharing hobby-related details with people on LinkedIn instead of leading with, here are my skills? Do you recommend leading with, here's how I solved this problem?
Yeah. So I think just generally speaking, I think it's great to share hobby projects that you work on, particularly ones that would resonate with a broad audience. And so an example of this is I actually have every year I get so I live in Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsinite. I have one thing that we do in Wisconsin is sometimes people will put their children on the Packers season ticket waiting list when they're born because it's such a long waiting list. And so I put my son on the waiting list when he was born, and I created a Tableau visualization of our progress towards getting season tickets. You start out at like 150,000 in line, and then, you go down a few thousand spots every year when you get an update. And I actually projected it forward to show like what the current age projection is for him to get tickets at. And it's like something ridiculous. It's like 70 years old, but like, that was something fun for us to track, but like, it's also been something fun when I go, to engagements here locally to just share as a fun example during my intro or something like that. Right. And then, people will remember that, like people will see me the next time I see them. They're like, hey, where are you at on the season ticket waiting list, or whatever, stuff like that. And so I think that it shows like, hey, like, wow, Dustin likes data so much that he had to build this visualization, right, about like where he's at with the Packers season ticket waiting list, which it's not like it's rocket science to build that, but like it's just something that kind of attaches to your brand with folks. Like they're like, wow, it's someone that's passionate about what they do, so much so that they do it as a hobby, and so much so that they did it around something that's of interest of all of us, and so I think that hobby projects are great for kind of just demonstrating the passion that you have, because I think people are like, wow, you would do this on your own time. You must be pretty interested in developing a skill set around it. So I like it from that standpoint. I do think though that when it comes time to really get a role, I mean, your hobby projects are probably not going to get you the role. I mean, I think you do need to be able to articulate how you could take skills like that and connect it to, value for the organization that you're applying for, or how you've done it to create value for a previous organization if you've had the good fortune of being in an analytics position previously.
Yeah, I think so. I've just had a lot of personal projects, and I always try to share them on LinkedIn. And some of them have gotten a whole lot of visibility. And opened up opportunities for me. And it also does demonstrate that you have the skills. You just have to be clear in the way that you positioned it, right? So it's like, I'm sharing about this project, I'm providing value to the community, I'm being a community member, but then also specifically calling out that the types of techniques that you had to use to make that possible, right? Because we always assume that people are going to see something and that they're going to be able to infer that, You then, of course, have this skill or that skill. And actually,
Right.
with the tools that are out there, some of them are point and click. Some of them are, if you aren't calling out what you're actually doing, people actually really can't make that jump all of the time. Most of the time they
Sure.
can, but a lot of times they can't. And so, you can even put your hobby projects in your like about me on LinkedIn. Like I have everything sort of everywhere. If you look for me, you're probably going to hear about the school bus detector. There's
Yep. That's how I thought to invite you to my podcast, because I saw that project that you put out there. Yep.
Oh, well, I just a couple
Yep.
weeks ago did like a music similarity search thing too.
Cool.
So I'm always doing weird stuff and I'm always promoting it. It helps me to stay in front of people without having to come up with it's almost like, you don't it's an easy way to come up with topics if you just build something. At least for me, it feels
Totally.
easier, and it does get visibility, and it does get job offers in
Yeah.
my DMs too. I've had people
I can
reach out and
imagine.
ask me, oh, hey, I'm working on this computer vision thing, and it's like, I'm not qualified for that. I'm a tabular data person who just dabbles in computer vision, so not
Yeah.
qualified, but the people do see it and they do come.
Mhm.
So
I was super impressed by that project, by the way, the school bus detector.
oh,
And
thank you.
yeah, I think we even talked about it on the podcast. I was like, I can't imagine like how many businesses would want to have you develop a project like not exactly the same but similar. I could think of a million different use cases. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, there was a lot of buzz around that.
yeah.
Okay. So I think we have time for just one more question. So then this is from Janet. And so she says, do you think the Maven type report competitions get noticed? And so in general, right, if somebody is
hmm
taking part in competitions where they're building
hmm
a dashboard,
hmm
do you think that has value in the community or for getting a job?
So this is a great question. And I think that it does, but I think that it has to be positioned correctly. And so I'm going to use the example of I'm a Tableau ambassador. If you go out on Tableau's website, you see me listed as a Tableau social ambassador. Within our Tableau community, within our bubble of the Tableau community, we know what that recognition means, right? But when I say that to a business leader at an organization that's outside of the data industry that I'm applying to, 9 times out of 10, they have no idea what a Tableau ambassador is. And who knows what connotation they have attached to it if I just say I'm a Tableau ambassador, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to be very, very intentional about explaining what that means and very concisely and quickly to be one. Look, there's, I think, 396 of them out there. If you look at Tableau's website, these are the leaders in the community that they recognize for great work that they've done external to their organization to helping people learn data skills, things like this. And I put pressure on myself. I had to do that on the fly. I don't know if that's what my elevator pitch would be or not. But my point is if you are recognized through a contest, whether it's through Maven or someone else, you can mention their name, but you could say, you know what? And if you look at, and guess what? Maven Analytics is one of the top analytics training platforms out there in the world. If you go on their website, you'll see me recognized for this award. Guess what? There was 500 people that put their visualization in, and I finished in the top 10 or something like that. And you can see the comments that people had on it, things like that. And just make it fun, make it lighthearted, but make sure you make a quick connection to what does that mean? Because some business leaders, may not know as much as Maven's name is out there, as much as Tableau's name is out there. Not every business leader is going to know what that recognition means. So make sure there's a clear connection to why that set you apart.
Mm. And even if you don't place it all and you have a killer dashboard that you can now bring in as a portfolio project in all your interviews, that has like real value to you, regardless of where you place. You're able to show that you understand best practices in dashboarding, that you understand how to synthesize information, you understand which insights are relevant and what to show and what not to show, and how to put together a summary and objectives. And so it's all the things. It's whether it's for Maven or anywhere else, if you're doing something that's going to help you to build your portfolio that has huge value, that you could still be showing that same project 5 years from now to employers about, a recent project that you did. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's
That's
well
good.
said. Yeah.
Okay,
Mm.
perfect. Well, Dustin, thank you so much for joining. This episode was awesome. I think you touched on so much stuff, and I learned a lot too. Just the way that you think about the community building, and there was just definitely some insights that you shared that sort of changed how it was something I hadn't heard before, and I really appreciate that.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, glad to join. It's an honor to join the podcast, and I've been a big fan of yours and all of your content, and appreciate everything that you do for the data community. And same thing for Maven. They've just been tremendous supporters of some of my content and events and things like that. So I'm hugely appreciative to be invited on.
All right, awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you everybody for coming. Thank you so much, and hope to see you next week. And thanks again, Dustin.
Thank you.